fact, music was a part of healing rituals in many ancient cultures. And we like music, right? It's enjoyable, it's motivational, it's universal, it's fun, but it's so much more than that. As more and more research is being completed, they're finding more and more that music isn't just an enjoyable pastime, but it's an integral part of human history and culture, and it's also a deeply ingrained biological function. Dale Taylor writes that music influences human behavior by affecting the brain and subsequently other bodily structures in ways that are observable. Like, we can see the response, we can observe it really easily. They're identifiable. We can classify, this response to music. It's very easy to identify it. They're measurable. We can measure the effect music is having on our brains and body, and it's predictable. And so that really is what provides the necessary foundation for using it in treatment, right? It's not like a guess and check, like, oh, we think music affects us. Like, we can actually qualify and quantify, like, this is how music will affect the brain. This is how it will affect the body. And let's channel that for therapeutic outcomes. In fact, in the past 30 or so years, they've been doing more and more studies on music in the brain. They're finding that music is the only sensory input that's processed in all areas of your brain simultaneously. And so as music therapists, we want to read all this research about, how music's processed in the brain. But a few years back, I heard an amazing keynote by a neuroscientist who is studying musical processing in the brain to better understand the brain, which is sort of like the opposite of what we're doing. And he said it's such a valuable tool because it's the only thing that affects so many areas at the same time. If we want to understand how the brain works, we have to look at music because that's giving us way more material to work with and way more insight. So I thought that was just really, really cool. It's unique because it's the way it's processed across so many areas. And with the idea of neuroplasticity, which essentially, before the 80s, we didn't think of your brain as like changing much, right? Like, kind of where you were is where you were. And, if you had an injury, they'd say 6 months out, like however far you get, that's it. But we now know that's not true, right? We know that our brain is constantly changing and adapting based on the input that we receive. I know a few years back, there was a landmark bestseller about what the internet is doing to our brain. And I don't want to go there because none of us want to know. But it's the idea that, like, as culture has changed, as technology's changed, our brains change based on what we do. And then music becomes a huge part of it, because if we know we can change our brains based on what we do, and we know we have access to music that's activating all areas at the same time, it becomes a really, really valuable tool to strengthen neural connections. It becomes a valuable tool for training the brain to compensate for areas that maybe are struggling, and these sorts of things as well. So essentially, music can rewire your brain. It can change how you're completing tasks and how you're functioning. It can develop the new neural strategies because it is such a powerful sensory input, right? The more sensory you have, the more your brain learns, right? And this is why, going back to kids again, we want kids to be playing, to be touching, to be smelling, to be moving, to be having these highly sensory engaged activities, because that's how they learn. The same thing when we're talking about older adults and we're talking about maintaining cognitive function. It's the same principle, right? The more sensory input we can get, the more we're accessing that brain, the more we're wiring that brain, the more we're really prompting that brain to do what it does best. And music activates, both hemispheres, right? It is not right brain or left brain. It is both brains. And it's also the white matter between them, which is really key. That white matter, the corpus callosum, is how those two sides of your brain talk to each other. And so music's processed there as well, which we want our whole brain working together, right? Especially if we've got some extra challenges going on. If we have some dementia, we want to be using the brain fully as much as possible. So that's a little bit about why. We tend to think about music emotionally first, right? And that emotional draw of music is so essential. I think all of us, when we hear a piece of music, usually the first thing we latch onto is, how did it make us feel, right? Like, what was the emotional response? We hear that before we hear lyrics, before we think too much about the beat, like before we really start thinking about it, we just immediately have that emotional response. And again, this is an innate response that occurs throughout your entire life. When my daughter was 2, I couldn't sing lullabies because every time I sang Brahms' lullaby, she would bawl her eyes out because it was so beautiful. And she would be like, it's my lullaby, and she'd be crying. And, I didn't teach her that. Like, she had no way to know that. Like, she heard the music, and that was her, like, innate emotional response. And it was easy to see that the music was affecting her on an emotional level. She couldn't articulate. I mean, she was 2. She just called it her lullaby and cried, right? Likewise, when we're working with older adults, especially people who are living with dementia, we still observe those strong emotional responses to music, right? And they maybe have stopped showing a response to much else. But then the music starts and they get that big smile, or they get a few tears, or they have that emotional response first. And it's so important, because when we're talking about regression and we're talking about dementia, when we start losing the ability to be able to verbally articulate feelings, to share about our day, to discuss and process our experiences, that can be really challenging, because even if we can't articulate our experiences, we're still feeling them on this emotional level, right? Like we're still having the emotional experience. And then it becomes, how do you process that? How do you express that? How do you deal with those emotions? And music is a great way to do that, because we do not have to verbally process, right? Like they don't have to go through and analyze and dissect and clearly articulate what they're feeling, why they're feeling it. They can have that emotional experience. We can experience those emotions together in a shared musical experience without them needing to have all of these other cognitive skills, right? So that emotional response is huge. It gives them a chance to kind of connect with others, right? If we're all making music together and we're having fun and we're smiling, you're feeling that emotional impact of this social interaction, even if you can't say, I love being with my friends right now. Like you maybe don't have the words, but you're still having that experience. So it allows them to connect with others and the world around them in a meaningful way. But also when we have those emotional responses to music and it starts bringing up memories, then they're connecting to themselves and to their past, and they're remembering who they are and what makes them unique as an individual. And all of that really serves to reduce isolation and depression. But it's coming back to that emotional response of music. Again, emotionally, from little babies all the way to end of life, we do not lose that emotional response to music. Okay, so aside from the emotional component of music, rhythm plays a huge role in our ability to connect with music and for music to be effective therapeutically. Being honest, how many of you would say that you have a good sense of rhythm? And I can't see with the view. I'm going to change the view. Some of you do, some of you don't. Anybody here say that they have like no rhythm whatsoever? Who has like no rhythm? No one's going to admit that. Y'all know where I'm going with this, right? Oh, okay. Kimberly has no rhythm. You realize the only way for you to have no rhythm whatsoever is for you to be dead, right? Like that is literally the only way, because our bodies are rhythmic. Our breathing's rhythmic. Our heartbeat is rhythmic. So please, like, don't tell me you have no rhythm. I'm like, I hope you do. Okay. You need it to survive. And even with no musical training, our body naturally responds rhythmically to music, right? And you might think you have two left feet when you dance, and you might not always stay on the beat, but your body will respond to that rhythm, and it does want to respond to that rhythm. Oftentimes, this has been supported by a lot of research studies, but I've also seen it in my own work. When I'm working with folks with dementia, a lot of times, we see the stories, we hear the stories on the news about Betty, and Betty didn't say much and didn't talk much. And all of a sudden the song came on the radio and Betty lit up and she smiled and she shared this huge story about her childhood and her life. And it's, this amazing moment, right? And I love those moments. I don't want to minimize it. Like, I absolutely love that in my work. But my favorite is when we're in a more advanced stage of dementia and we're past that stage where we're going to have that verbal response. Do you know what they will still respond to? Rhythm. It's the rhythm. And we see that in studies. Even when there's no more of a verbal response, they'll still respond rhythmically. And so I'll see it in groups with people in more advanced stages of dementia. They may not talk. They may not share that story from their childhood, but their toes are going. Their shoulders are going. They're still moving. They're still responding to that rhythm. It is the last thing that they will respond to musically is rhythm. Which is interesting, because can you guess the first thing that a small baby responds to in music? I bet you can. It's rhythm, right? Songs with a strong beat. My niece is close in age to my daughter. And when she was 3 months old, she's just 3 months old. So teeny tiny, like she's not even able to like roll over yet, right? Cannot even roll over. She's laying on the floor. And so I put on some classic 1950s rock and roll music, super strong beat, right? And she's going nuts, like the arms, the legs, she's kicking and she is smiling at me. Her parents are classical music aficionados, right? They're concert pianists. So they've been rocking her to sleep. She listens to Bach chorales at bedtime, at 3 months old. and they're watching me and they can't decide whether to be delighted because like here she's going nuts, or kind of horrified, right? Because like here I am coming in with this like rock and roll, and she's listening to like St. Matthew's Passion at bedtime every night, and they're like, what is, like, what is this? And don't get excited. I am not saying that Danny and the Juniors is better than Bach. I am not. But at 3 months old, the rhythm is the first thing she can respond to. And I was picking music that had that strong rhythm. And at 3 months old, she could hear it. She could latch onto it. She wanted to move with it. Again, the same thing at the very end of life. We see the rhythm is the whole lifespan at the end of life. When we have people that are in very advanced stages of aging and dementia, they might not be able to talk. They might not be able to share those stories anymore, but they are still responding to the rhythm. They're still moving. Their bodies still want to go to it. So I think it's amazing to see that when we really are thinking about music, we're thinking all the way from when you're born, all the way through end of life. And of course, everything in between. All of us are responding to music, right? Emotionally, rhythmically, neurologically, biologically. We have it all. So the point is that music is a deeply ingrained biological function. Engagement comes naturally and it lasts a lifetime. So when we're thinking about how powerful music can be on a variety of levels, what do we do with that information, right? Like, what do we do with it? And what exactly is music therapy? Essentially, music therapy is taking everything we know about music's effect on the brain and the body and the emotions and channeling it towards therapeutic outcomes, okay? So we can define music therapy is the evidence-based and goal-directed process. It uses music to address non-musical needs and improve functioning in areas like cognition, communication, social skills, motor skills, mental and emotional health. So essentially, as a music therapist, I do an assessment process, just like any other therapist. I look at what a client needs, what are they doing well, what are their challenges, and then I develop specific musical interventions to target those through actively engaging them in music. Essentially, I'm designing interventions. They're designed to be enjoyable, but the real purpose is we're looking at them not being a good singer, not being a good drummer. We're looking at increasing range of motion or improving strength or getting better coordination across midline or with pincer grasp, providing them with an emotional outlet. Like, I don't care how well they sing the song, but are we having an emotional connection? Are they having that emotional outlet? Those are the goals. So the music is the tool, but the goals are always functional skills for everyday life in music therapy. I'm going to assess their weaknesses. I'm going to assess their strengths. I'm going to see what they love. I'm going to see what they hate. And I'm going to use the things they love. I'm going to use their strengths to kind of help work on some of those things that are bigger challenges. Using music as a tool, instruments, singing, dancing, movement, all kinds of things. So why specifically music with older adults, right? We've talked kind of in general. First of all, if you're talking about a whole lifetime of experiences, that is really what we want to be bringing into therapy and into engagement older, as an older adult, right? Like, we want to be tapping into that lifetime of experiences, like we've talked about. Music, it's enjoyable, it's motivational, and it's fun, right? Like, why should working on goals have to not be fun? Like, if it can be fun, music's fun, like, let's enjoy it. It's universal. Everyone is musical. Everyone can enjoy music. Not saying everyone wants music all the time or everyone likes the same music or always feel like music, but in general, it's this universal human experience, right? That's been around as long as recorded history. There's a lot of room for personal preference. So when you're bringing music into a therapeutic environment, you can bring something that reflects their cultural identity and their personal identity. It can be very normalizing and less clinical because we're doing what they like, what's personal to them, what's part of their identity versus just kind of a cut and dried clinical intervention. It's familiar and it's easily accessible, right? We're not asking them to do something crazy. We're asking them to do something they already are doing, they're already enjoying. It has that huge emotional component, right? You get emotions involved, that's going to draw them right into the experience right away. There's a few other things. Music is structured in time. So rhythm and melodies stimulate physical, intellectual, and emotional responses on multiple levels. And it really helps to sustain attention, even with cognitive decline, right? Because when we're talking or when we're doing things and there's not a structural support, it's sort of just out there in space. It's very nebulous. But when everything is structured with a musical context, we remember like when we're supposed to complete a phrase, when we're supposed to move, because we have this added layer of structure telling our brain, hey, stay engaged. Hey, sing these words. Hey, we're going to move. The structure is there, right? So we're not just asking for skills kind of in a vacuum. Older adults with or without dementia, they're very varied in their needs and abilities, right? Everyone has different strengths. Everyone has different challenges. Everyone might be having some decline in different areas. But it's sort of ideal for meeting everyone at their level, right? It's adaptable. And so you might have some people that are singing and singing very well. You might have other people that singing is more of a challenge, but they can shake and move and do the maracas. And you have someone else that maybe is just tapping their toes. And then you have someone else that's like, hey, let's write an entire song, like, because that's where I'm at. You can all work together kind of using where they're at in a shared musical experience while everyone's individual needs are being met, because it's so adaptable. You can, make it easier, make it harder. You can also adapt to the needs of the moment, right? Like if you're with a client and you come in and you maybe have planned some songs or some interventions and you see, hey, they're not in the place I expected them to be when I showed up, it's very easy to adapt and be like, hey, we need to slow it down, or hey, we need to make this a little bit easier, or hey, they're high energy, I need to like pick it up today and kind of match their energy. So you are able to make those adaptations. With nonverbal seniors and people that are, not able to communicate verbally, hearing familiar melodies, it's very comforting. And it kind of eases that frustration. If you think about someone that's having struggles to communicate, and then you bring in this music, it's familiar, it's comforting, they can engage with that, it's reducing that isolation. And it's also giving them an emotional outlet that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. They don't need to verbally process or cognitively process, they're just emotionally expressing and engaging. For people that are disoriented, music again has that structure, but it also has predictability, right? Like when you hear a melody and there's repetition with verses and choruses, you know what's coming next. You can predict what's coming next. And so it kind of makes things less anxious, right? Like we know what's coming, and that can be very, very calming. And when people are participating musically and they're able to in a way that's calming and predictable, they're not alone, they're not isolated, they're not regressing alone. And that's really what we want to stop. There's been several studies done on musical reminiscence or reality orientation, and they show that if reminiscence groups or reality orientation groups are done with music, that they are more effective than groups done without music. And there's research to back that up. A lot of older adults really love music. They have a strong preference for music. That's their choice. And they're even eager and capable of gaining musical skills, right? And that might not necessarily be a goal of therapy, but just a life goal in general. They aren't necessarily done learning and growing. And I've worked with older adults that are like, hey, I'd love to learn a little bit about how to be a better singer or how to do this. And that's a way, like, we never want to be in a place where we don't ever get to try something new, or we don't get to learn something new and grow. And music's a great way to do that. It increases motivation to participate in exercise, right? Anyone here work out without music, right? We all want music to work out. We run faster if we've got the beat in our ears. It's also been shown to reduce sensitivity to pain. There's a lot of studies that have been done specifically about Alzheimer's and dementia patients, and they consistently show that wherever their level of functioning is normally, their level of functioning with music is higher and out of sync, right? So even as they decline with dementia, we can't stop it forever. But the fact is, where they're functioning normally, like just in day-to-day interactions, and where they function with music is out of sync. And that musical functioning is going to be higher. And what they find is that musical memory remains intact for quite some time, even with significant cognitive decline, that musical part is intact. And it has to do with, again, how music's processed in the brain. It's processed in all areas simultaneously. And of course, emotionally, it's stored very, very deep in the brain, in the amygdala. And so as other deterioration neurologically might be happening, it's not happening there. And that music is kind of really wedged in there, nice and tight, which is why we see that. It helps them recall their lost memories, right? If they can tap into that music and recall their memories, they aren't forgetting who they are, right? And that's huge. I can't imagine not being able to remember, what was important to me in my life experiences, and how challenging that would be, because we don't want to lose our sense of who we are, where we've been, what's important to us. And so every time you're going in there and giving them a chance to recall those memories, they're essentially not just telling you a story. They're telling you, this is who I am. And they're telling themselves, this is who I am, or remember who I am. So that's there. There's a lot of studies that have been done neurologically. There's a coupling mechanism between rhythm and movement. So if exercise is your goal and movement is your goal, rhythm is the key there. And I won't get too much into that because I want to talk about the how. But those are kind of like a sampling of reasons of like why music with older adults. It's absolutely great for them. So then the question is, what about if you're not a music therapist? What should you do? And I would encourage you to call a music therapist if you need a music therapist, but make music with your loved one always, right? Like if you need a music therapist, you need more in-depth work, please call them. But even if you call them, even if you don't, you should be doing music with your loved one, with your clients always, because there's a lot that you can do to kind of enjoy music and kind of tap into the power of music without being a quality musician. Like you might not be a therapist. You might be like, I have no musical skills whatsoever. It's fine. We have these awesome smartphones nowadays. Like you can literally get any music in the whole wide world for free, like with the touch of your fingers. So you don't have to be trained. You don't have to be a musician to be like, hey, let's engage in some music. Let's sing and dance. Like it's literally in your pocket. All the time. So knowing that you have access to music and knowing how important music is with older adults, I really want to talk a little bit about what you can do, what anybody can do to sort of get more out of that. So I'm going to ask Renee to go ahead and she's going to pull up. There's a handout available. I wanted you to kind of hear me talk when I'm talking about, why music's so valuable, but I want to make sure that you are leaving with tools that will actually help you kind of apply the power of music. And so you have those as well. So here's some engagement tips, how to use music with your client or with your loved one if you are a care partner. Number one, use the client or loved one's preferred music. This is number one. They want to respond. They will respond to their preferred music more strongly than non-preferred music. I know this is pretty basic, but I do bring it up because a lot of times some of the questions that I get are like, hey, can you give me a playlist of calming music? Or can you give me a playlist of music that could like make my clients happy? And I'm like, no, I can't do that. And that's something I will never do as a therapist unless I'm working directly with that client. And I know for a fact that that music will make them happy or calm. And really what it comes down to is our preference. Like our preferences are what make us happy or what calm us down. And in music therapy, we talk about the fact that there are therapists in hospitals, whose client needs to be calm before a surgery and they're listening to like Kiss or Metallica. And, they don't sell those CDs labeled with relaxing across the front, right? We don't think of that as relaxing music. But because that's their preference, it is relaxing for them. Like it is calming for them. So you really want to think about what the preferred music is. Now, how do you determine preferred music? This is a huge topic because when we're in a care partner relationship, we kind of come into that relationship at different times. So how you're going to gather that information might be differently. Number one, ask your client or loved one directly, right? Go straight to the source and just ask them, what kind of music do you like? What kind of artists did you listen to growing up? That's the easiest way. That's not always possible, right? Depending on where they are in the stages of dementia, you might not be able to get an answer or a complete answer. Number two, ask their family members, what they like to listen to in the past, what kind of concerts they went to, get the history that way. Also consider asking staff or other care partners, anyone that's gotten to observe them and seeing, hey, they really tend to respond to country or they tend to respond to Elvis or whatever it is. Sometimes you don't always have the way of getting this information, in which case you can try guess or check. Really quickly, I'm not going to ask Renee to pull it up. Included in your handout is a musical preference questionnaire, and that is there to guide you through asking questions. Oh, she's got it right there. It will guide you through asking some different questions related to musical preferences. And so some of it's pretty obvious, like favorite genres, styles, artists, favorite songs. But then there's stuff about personal history, like church attendance or military involvement or hobbies, because that will give us clues as well, right? Like if we know, oh, they went to church for 25 years and sang in the choir, like, hello, like that's where you're going to go. You're going to want to incorporate some of that music from their religious affiliation. If they were in the military, they will probably have more experience and memories tied to patriotic music and some of those things as well. If they participated actively in music in the past, if they were in a band, try band music, right? Like, there's this stuff as well. And then hobbies and interests, because that allows you to kind of bring in music. So the questionnaire is there. It's great to use with your loved one and client. It's great to use with staff that's working with them. It's great to use with their other family members to get a little bit more of a history, like a life history, and how it affects musical history. So it's there to kind of start getting those preferences analyzed. If you're not getting a lot of information on that musical preferences questionnaire and from asking, you're going to have to use the guess and check method. And this is something a lot of times as a therapist, when I get called in, we are at a guess and check point because there is no one there who is able to give like real concrete answers to what they like. If you are guessing and checking, there's two good places to start. First is studies tell us that we tend to most strongly respond to music that was popular when we were between the ages of 18 and 25. And this is, these are formative years. You can go a little younger, like 16 or whatever, when we're teenagers and we're falling in love and we're making career choices and people are, kind of is transitioning between being a child, being an adult. Those years tend to be really key, and the music that you listen to tends to be highly salient. So that's a great place to start. One that is less commonly talked about, but I think is super important, is the music that was popular when their parents or caregivers were between ages of 18 to 25. This is supported definitely in the research and in the literature, but I think also from my own experience, I see it to be much more strong than you would expect. And the reason for this is growing up as a child, most likely you or your loved one listen to the music that your parents and caregivers listen to, right? So for me, like Simon and Garfunkel and John Denver and the Beach Boys are like highly salient. They're glued to lots and lots of memories. They're very deeply ingrained with my identity and emotional responses and memories. But I was born in 1984, right? Like those bands were playing long before I was even born. So it seems odd to be like, well, that would be what I respond to, but it's because that's what my parents liked. So when I was a child, we'd be in the car, we'd be on vacation. That's what they would play. And, those childhood memories are deeply ingrained. So that's kind of another place to look, is kind of what was popular then, because most likely they heard it as a child. Keep track of songs that generate a strong response for future reference. This is something you cannot start soon enough because this becomes a valuable tool down the road. Included in the handouts, it's just, you don't have to use it, but it's there, is the strong response tracking sheet. This is something we use with clients, we use with client families. The sooner you start this, like start today, the sooner you start, the better. And just start keeping track of what they respond to. And we would consider a strong response things like smiling, crying, moving, dancing, sharing a memory, anything, and kind of keep track of that. And what will happen is you'll start getting an idea of their preferences. This is something we love to do with clients as well, because when we jot down those memories that come out, we know that eventually we'll be at a point when maybe they can't share that memory. And that gives their family a chance to say, hey, do you remember? And we can kind of give them some extra prompts for those memories down the line when we play the song, because we know, hey, that was the song at their wedding, or that was a song they loved, when they were in high school, or whatever the case may be. So it's sort of just a tool to start keeping track of what you observe, them responding to and how they respond. Which gives some clues as well. Then you can always try new songs or new artists that are similar to the artist, the genre, the decade, etc., to the songs that have generated a strong response, or the songs that they've indicated a preference for, right? So if they only tell you like, oh, I love these two artists, you can listen to them, but you're like, hey, I'd like to expand this. You're going to look for similar. So if they love Hank Williams, you're going to pull in some other country artists. If they love Elvis, you'll pull in some other rock and roll that was popular around the same time, whatever the case may be. And that'll kind of let you expand on this list a little bit. Don't be afraid to try something totally new once in a while, because I don't think we lose the need for new experiences when we're older, right? Like we don't just want to listen, yes, go for the preferred music, but we don't want to just listen to the same things over and over again. And we want new experiences. We want the chance to try new things. And sometimes when we're older, our opportunities for trying new things decreases. So just try a new song, and a really easy way to start, something that's similar to something they've liked before, maybe something completely new, and just play it. And you can just start asking, did you like it or not? And just kind of let them talk about it. If you're more nervous to introduce something new, you can always say like, hey, let's try a new song today. Do you want a fast song or a slow song? So they have some control over what new song is coming in. You're getting a little bit of direction, and they can listen to a new song, and they might be like, I don't like that song. His voice sounds horrible. That's fine. They got to try something new, and you're not going to try that again. You'll try something else new. But it's just a good way to kind of keep that musical engagement there, and let them develop some new preferences as well and have something new to enjoy. Another tip, be cognizant of volume. It's always better to start soft and increase than to start too loudly. The last thing you want to do is start what should be a very enjoyable and happy experience with this huge shock and startle response, right? Because we know when we get that, our breath rate, our heart rate already goes up, and then you're like, hey, we're having fun with music, but you're still trying to come down from the fact that like the speakers just blasted. So we want to be really cognizant of that, especially if we have things like with hearing aids and stuff. They don't always discriminate between sounds as well as our ears do naturally. So some of those volume changes can be more intense. So start soft. You can always turn it up. You don't want to have to start loud and turn it down. Use speakers rather than headphones whenever possible when you're doing a shared listening experience. We really want musical engagement to reduce isolation. And, the last thing I want to do is be like, let's share some music together. Here, I'm going to put some headphones on you, and you're now, physically isolated, and you're listening in an isolated way. This also really helps with volume issues, because if you are hearing the speaker, right away where the volume's at. If you're using digital music services, which we are now, we're listening on iTunes, we're listening on Spotify, there can be really big discrepancies in song volumes, right? Like typically an artist's album will be all about the same volume, right? If you put the volume on, it's good for the whole album. But when you start bouncing around between different selections, that volume sometimes needs to go up and down. So that's just something to monitor. We found that as, we stopped using CDs and switched to virtual, that, between different artists and different, old records that are now, on a digital music platform, the recorded volume is just different. So you want to just kind of watch it as well. But speakers will help monitor that, as well as making sure that it's, a shared, engaged experience. Encourage simple movements while listening together. Tap your toes, sway and shake your shoulders, dance, march, etc. Be sure to move with them, right? Like you are engaging in this experience with them. You're not just being like, hey, why don't you tap your toes while I sit over here? You want to be going too. Go with the flow. This should feel natural and fun. This is not like a regimented gym exercise. If you are exercising, please use music, but that's different than what we're talking about here. And music can be a great accompaniment for, an exercise program, but that's just not the purpose. Follow your client, follow your loved one's lead, and do what comes naturally. If they're listening and kind of swaying, then you listen and kind of sway, and then be like, hey, let's do our shoulders a little more. Let's get our shoulders into it. But just go with the flow, follow their lead, do what they're doing, and just see if you can expand on that. For movement, you can always look at pictures that are related to the song if they're applicable. So for example, if you are, listening to Elvis, Jailhouse Rock, there's a lot of famous photos of him, shooting for the movie Jailhouse Rock that you can look at and talk about, Elvis. Did you see Elvis on TV, and look at the pictures? If you're listening to songs about like Surf City or Under the Boardwalk, about being at the beach, bring in some landscapes to talk about it and have another way to kind of stimulate responses and stimulate discussion. This is just for fun. It just adds another dimension to the listening experience. Some songs are more conducive to this than others. For me personally, like I love to bring in landscapes, right? Because if we're, talking about being in a specific place, we're listening to music about a specific place, then seeing those images as well works really well together. And we all know the power of image and music, right? If you've ever seen movie or TV, man, images and music working together is a really powerful, powerful trigger. So we want to tap into that when we can. Okay, ask questions after listening. Consider starting with a more narrow yes or no question, and then broadening to more open-ended questions. We want to start at a place where they are successful and they feel successful, to encourage that engagement, right? When we feel that we are struggling or we're not successful, we tend to kind of, shut down and stop. So we want to start easy and work a little bit harder. You can try questions about facts first, like, oh, did you ever see Elvis perform on TV? Or do you like going to the beach? What do you like at the beach? Just fact-based questions, and then you can progress to more feeling questions. You know, how did the song make you feel? Oh, you shared a memory about, you know, dancing with your husband to the song. How did you feel when you all were dancing? And some of those emotional questions as well. If you need to broaden it, so for example, like, you know, you're listening to a song about different foods and recipes and, you know, who likes to cook. I'm thinking like jambalaya, or I like bread and butter, she likes toast and jam. There's some cute songs. You can kind of talk about that and say, oh, you know, did you love to cook when you were growing up? You know, like yes or no. And then you could say, well, what did you like to cook? That's a really open-ended question, and that might be a big leap. So you could say, well, did you prefer to cook really savory dishes, or did you like to bake sweet things? Or you could say, what are some of the things you like to cook? Was it like spaghetti, or was it steak, or did you make tacos or fried chicken? And you can kind of give them some suggestions to pull from, because sometimes that broad open-ended question, what did you like to cook, it's a lot. Like it's a lot to kind of sift through neurologically and be like, what are those responses? But some of those suggestions can be helpful too, to let them, you know, kind of prompt something and let them pull. So again, you want to start more narrow and then broaden as they're having success, to try to get as much discussion as possible. If the discussion is not happening, just move on. Like, don't force it. If they've said what they want to say, maybe you were hoping to have an in-depth discussion about falling in love, and they, you know, said 2 sentences about when they met their spouse, and they just don't care to talk about it anymore, and then just move on. Listen to another song. It doesn't have to be, you know, this stressful academic exercise. You just want to go with the flow. Always remember that crying and sadness are okay responses to music. Be with your client or loved one in the moment, and don't try to just make them happy, right? You want to kind of be there with them, let them experience those emotions, let them express those emotions, you know, provide support in that. Do seek additional support if the feelings of sadness are like really, really overwhelming, and you feel that they're really struggling with them, or if they seem to kind of be stuck and they're struggling to process something and it's kind of coming up over and over and over again, and they seem to just be having trouble. That would be a great time to get some additional help to kind of work through that. But for a lot of clients, sometimes we just need to cry. Like, we need to remember a sad memory. We need to be sad for a time in our life that has passed, you know, and that's okay. And we want to support that. That is hugely important as well. No one's happy all the time, right? We want to give space to let those unhappy emotions out. And especially when we're talking about aging, there's a lot of challenges, you know, that come along with that, and a lot of changes that may be positive and some that may be really just difficult to come to grips with. And music can be a great way to kind of address those emotions tied to aging as well. Going along with this, number 9, always meet your client or loved one where they are in that moment. This is called the ISO principle. This is my favorite. It's very simple. ISO principle says, meet the person where they are. Very simple to say, much harder in practice, right? And this is true, I think, even when we interact with friends and family members and peers. It's important to meet them where they are in that moment. A lot of times we tend to come in, and it's on a subconscious level. We want to meet them where we are, right? Like, we're carrying our own emotions, our own feelings, our own ideas about how that interaction is going to go into that interaction with us. But we're really, you know, we're bringing in where we are, not thinking about where they are. The other thing is, sometimes we come in thinking they are where they were yesterday. And yesterday they were really cheerful and excited and energetic and happy and sharing tons of memories. That doesn't mean that's where they are today. They could be in a totally different place today. It means not seeing them where you expect them to be, right? We do subconsciously carry expectations of where we expect somebody to be. And then we're like, oh, you know, we keep trying to hold on to those expectations, thinking they ought to be there. And that's even worse, like where they ought to be, right? We think they ought to be in this place and they're not. Meet them where they are. And this is true for meeting them where they are energy level wise, meeting them where they are emotionally, but also recognizing with dementia that their time frame in reality may be different. They may be in a place where they are a child again and they're reliving those childhood memories. That's not where they were yesterday, but that's where they are today. You want to meet them there in those childhood memories with them as a child in that moment, and just be flexible with that. Number 10, have fun. Music's a great way to engage with your loved one. And it's also a great way to engage multiple generations together, right? So if you are working with a family member or you're a professional care partner working with a family, it's a great way to kind of get everyone involved, children, grandchildren, even great grandchildren. It's something they can do and they can enjoy together. And obviously, when you're doing this, you want to be focused on your loved one. This is about them. It's about their wants and needs. But you as a care partner should be having fun as well. They're going to pick up and absorb your energy. And if you're frustrated or you're really working at it, like you've decided we're going to have this engaged experience, they're going to pick up on that. And so if you're relaxed and you're having fun, they're going to be more relaxed and they're going to be having fun as well. Being a care partner is really, really hard. And so one of our goals as therapists is, encouraging music engagement, not just for your loved one, but for you to have an enjoyable outlet as well, and to have something where you can just have fun together. You can have an enjoyable experience together. It's something that should hopefully be a little break from the job of being a care partner and just the day-to-day tasks that have to be completed. It's a chance to just enjoy your loved one, enjoy your client, and share music together. So that's it with the handouts. Last but not least, I'm going to touch really briefly, so we still have time for questions, on what about using music when you can't be there in person. And this became a really hot topic because we had this little thing called a global pandemic the last year. This is really where sharing their preferred music with other staff and family members becomes key, right? Like in my ideal world, if you have a list of your loved one's preferred music, they're in long-term care, please like post it in the room, put it in their chart, make it impossible to miss. They love this music, because you want to encourage other people that are working with them and spending time with them to use it as well. And this is something we've done as therapists with a lot of our clients, and worked with a lot of families, and then worked with other, other professionals, and been like, hey, this is her preferred music. If she's having trouble with transitions, this works really well. If she's having trouble calming down, this works really well. If she doesn't want to take her bath, this works really well, like use it. So that's something that I would hope, to encourage greater involvement anyway. But again, when you can't be there in person, it's letting their musical preferences work for them and work for you too, even when you're not there to facilitate it. If you do have a loved one who's in a long-term care facility, you got to understand there are staff time limitations. And so your ideal may be that the staff is doing all this music with them, but that might not just be the reality. And it just comes down to time. There's also challenges with leaving tech in that situation, right? And that's just a reality. I mean, I've heard stories from nursing homes that have tried to do, bringing in recorded music players, and they got destroyed. And it happened. Someone was confused. The music was too loud. And so they took care of the problem a little bit too permanently as well. There are a lot of music players on the market these days that are designed for older adults. They're designed to be very simple to use, with very, very minimal buttons that are easily placed, easy to grip, larger things like that to design. I can't really give like a thorough review of all of them, because what's going to come down is what's easy for you, what's easy for your loved one. I will tell you, I've seen products on the market that are like music players with music therapy. It comes preloaded with 15 songs. And if you've been listening to me, you already have identified the problem with somebody mass marketing a device as music therapy that is pre-programmed with the same 15 songs for everybody. That's not going to be patient preference, right? And that's not going to allow this, yeah, they might like the songs, but that's not necessarily what they really want to hear. So avoid preloaded. You want to go for their preferences. I know there's options. I've seen people using like Alexa or Echo that can be controlled remotely, which I think opens up some really big potential. The challenge is when you're not there in person and you can't gauge their response or reaction, like you're like, woohoo, I'm blasting their favorite energetic music, and they're already a little bit agitated and having a bad day. And then if you were there in person, you'd be like, whoo, like we need to kind of back off. We're in a different place today. You're not there in person. You can't gauge it. So I think there's some real challenges with that. But that to say, music making virtually is definitely an option. This is something we have done a lot during the pandemic. I can't say that I love it as much as being in person, but I will say, again, we meet all of our clients where they are. And if where they are is under quarantine and long-term care, then yes, we will meet them virtually, because that is our choice. But I think it can be a great option. It can be fun to engage over Zoom, over Skype, to do music together. I think one of the benefits is sometimes it can be harder to hear and kind of understand over technology, right? There can be some extra challenges with just some hearing and understanding of phrases. But with music, you have that context, you have all those other cues. It gives you another option. Maybe your mom, when you're in person, you can have that conversation because you're able to rephrase, you're able to use touch. you're over Zoom and you're like, I cannot redirect her. She doesn't understand me, but I can't fix the mic on her computer right now. Like there's not much I can do. But music, right? It's not just the words, it's the words, the melody, the accompaniment that's very familiar. Odds are they'll recognize that. And that can be a great way to engage, listening with music together over some of those other challenges. And on a personal story, we had a client, one of our individuals that we had worked with for a long time, who was in long-term care and was in quarantine, and he did get COVID. And the family had us working with him, with the nursing home, with the iPad. And it wasn't end of life, like he did pass away, and we worked with him at end of life through that. But the advantages for his daughters are we recorded those sessions for them, and we were able to do that on the iPad. And he had a daughter that lives in another country and she cannot come home, to be here because of all these restrictions. But the fact is she could see the response. She could see us, working with him through music. They were able to share in that experience as well. Because, even though it might not be ideal over the iPad, they were able to see everything happening, see his responses. And I heard from both of them just about how incredibly meaningful that is. So there are definitely options as well for using music from a distance. And I hope to goodness we never live through another pandemic like this. So hopefully this information becomes obsolete. But there's also a lot of reasons you might not be able to be there in person, whether it's distance, whether it's, personal health issues that make you more vulnerable, even though, no one else is in a pandemic. Time-wise, it might be that you can't always get there because it's too far, but you want to check in every night and do a little bit of music over Zoom. So there's a lot of reasons you might not be able to be there in person. So hopefully you've got some helpful tips for that as well, even though ideally we're all back in those buildings before long. Okay, well, that's all I have. I was told to allow time for questions. I see I did not allow much time for questions. So if you have them, I would encourage you to ask them quickly. And Renee, I'm going to see, I don't know if they've come through to you. I was trying not to watch the chat while I was talking.
Yes. You know what? I did notice, it might not be a question for you, but I did notice that Donica had her hand up at one point. So Donica, if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself or pass if you didn't have a question.
I think she was raising her hand because that was the rhythm question. If you have rhythm or not.
Okay.
And I was like, why is my hand
raising your hand that you have rhythm, not that you don't have rhythm. The idea is we all have rhythm. We are all breathing and our hearts are pumping. So hopefully you've got rhythm.
Yeah, I have rhythm. But
okay,
I was like,
awesome.
How do I didn't know that I had to lower it, so that's why it was still up.
Gotcha. Thank you, Donica. Well, if anybody else, why don't we just do like a physical raise if you have a question? Libby, looks like Libby has a question.
Thanks, Renee. Meredith, are you aware of any studies and the results of any benefits that come about when you listen to music on a regular basis to delay the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's disease?
I'm trying to think. I can't think of any studies, but based on everything I know about music and musical processing in the brain, I would say it's got to be good for you. And I would encourage you, if you are listening, ahead of time, to go ahead, even for yourself, and jot some notes about what music you like, how it makes you feel, because we hope that you'd always be able to express that. But I know actually in Wisconsin, music therapists up there worked to put musical preferences as part of their legal advanced directives paperwork, because of this and because of being so key for people to express, hey, if I'm in a position where I can't share what I want to listen to, it should be spelled out with like all of my medical needs as well. I think anytime you listen to music, you're engaging your whole brain, right? Like we've talked about that, this is your brain on music. If they do a scan, it lights up like a Christmas tree. So I think anytime you are engaging your brain, engaging your whole brain, you're strengthening those neural connections. And I think when you start adding things like singing with it or with movement with it, you're only helping your brain to stay healthy. So I'm sorry, I can't quote research, but yes, listen to music, engage that brain. And if you can bring some added dimensions into it, like singing or moving with the music, I think it's great for you.
I think Glenn Miller had, great name, by the way, had asked a question earlier about why can people with dementia sing words, but maybe can't speak words?
Okay, and this is something we see not just with dementia. We can see it with people who have had stroke or other challenges as well. Essentially, this comes back to how music is processed in your brain. So we said music is processed in all areas simultaneously. And if you look in the brain, music and speech, they actually do share some neural connections. So some of the ways you process speech or you speak yourself and the ways that you engage in music, they're using the same neural connections, but they also have distinct neural connections. So there's some parts of your brain that are like just processing speech and some that are just processing music. So typically what it means, and this is true for dementia, it's true for anyone else, if they are singing but not speaking, it's because the part of the brain that they need to speak is the one that has suffered damage or deterioration, but that part of the brain that has music is still intact. I actually worked, not dementia, but similar story. I worked with a client several years back, and she was an older adult, and she had suffered a stroke, which was making it difficult for her to speak. And so she was in one of my group sessions, and if you tried to ask her a question, like she would try to verbally answer and sounds would come out, but she couldn't form the words, but she would sing every single song that we did, like all the words, clear as day. She could sing everything. And so then the family asked me to work with her privately. There is actually a technique, it's called melodic intonation therapy, where we retrain the brain to speak using the part of the brain that is musical. And there's like a very, very specific procedure to follow. If you guys followed the story of Gabby Giffords a few years back when she was shot, she credits music therapy with regaining speech. And it comes back to the fact that they were teaching a different part of her brain to compensate for that damage. So then when I got in with her with the stroke, basically, and very, very much in a nutshell, and obviously it's more specific than that, we were actually singing like what she would speak, like, my name is Jane, and we learn it as a melody, and she could sing, my name is Jane, all day. And then you start removing some of those musical underpinnings, and then you'd be like, what's your name? My name is Jane. And it would come out clear as day. But it was because we trained her to do it musically, to get that part of the brain that was still working really, really well, to compensate. So I think it'd be the same thing with dementia. It's that part that's controlled speech that has been damaged, but when you're singing, you're using the musical part of your brain. And funny story about her too. She was like such a spitfire. I loved her spirit. And I hope it's okay if I say a bad word. I taught her to say, I don't give a damn. She was like really frustrated sometimes with life. And we were trying to work on different phrases like, I need help, and this is my name, and thank you, just basic functional phrases. And she never wanted to work on the phrase, I need help. Like she would just like stonewall me. I'm like, I'm not working on that. But then one day I came in and I was like, all right, what phrase do you want to work on? Because, we're working on several. And I said, or we can work on the phrase, I don't give a damn. And I was like, all right. So then her daughter lived out of state, like flew in 6 weeks later to, see how things are going. And she cheerfully looked at her and said, I don't give a damn. I was like, I don't know what to tell you. That's what we did in music therapy. We learned how to say frustration. So anyway, sorry, that was a long story, but yeah. What other questions do y'all have?
Any other questions? Looks like you might have just answered all of them in your presentation, Meredith.
That would be ideal. I hopefully would want to answer all of them. So.
No, that was wonderful. And if you do have any other questions, follow-up questions for Meredith, please feel free to shoot me an email and I will reach out to her to see if we can get some answers. But I'll turn it back over to Chris here to close the day. But thanks.
Awesome.
Meredith.
Thank you so much for having me. You guys are great listeners and I loved your questions. It's always good to have good questions too.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Meredith. Fascinating information. What a wonderful way to end our first day.